Our first speaker today is Dame Juliet Gerrard. Dame Juliet trained at Oxford University and moved to Aotearoa in 1993, where her career has included roles in both Crown Research Institutes and universities. Her research background is interdisciplinary, with particular interests in fundamental and applied protein science. She's held an industry and outreach fellowship with Callaghan Innovation, founded a startup company, chaired the Marsden Council, served on the Board of Directors of Plant and Food Research, and is currently on the Board of Te Papa. Since Dame Juliet's appointment in 2018 as the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor, kai tohu matanga putaio matua ki te piramia, she has worked from a base of 4 founding principles: rigour, inclusivity, transparency and accessibility. She's supported the science and science advisor community to provide advice to the Prime Minister, ministers and the public on a wide range of topics. One of the office's major reports is Rethinking Plastics in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I'd like you all to welcome Dame Juliet Gerrard.
Thanks, Mari. Tēnā koutou katoa, kia ora koutou ngā mihi nui. It's really great to be here, and I always say that, but I mean it this time, because getting back into rooms full of people and feeling that buzz that everybody's got when they get back together has just been so good. It's one of the perks of my job. And also, some of you must have actually seen the report, so it's nice to know that people other than bureaucrats read them. So I'm quite excited to be asked to talk on this topic. Thank you. So I thought you probably didn't really know what I did, so I would give you a quick overview of my role and how it works, and how it's not just me, but a collection of science advisors around the place. And then you asked me kindly to talk about the Rethink Plastics project, which I'm delighted to do. And I thought you might be interested in what happened to it next. So we write these big reports and kill ourselves, and then we sit down and have a glass of wine and a wee lie down, and hope that something happens to them and the recommendations get implemented. And this is a happy story where they are being so. It's great that it's having influence beyond just Wellington. And then I've been thinking about compost, and I thought, what an opportunity. So I'm going to expose my ignorance and ask you to reach out and tell me what I don't know about compost at the end, because we're doing a project on food waste. And I'll leave time for discussion, because it's always more interesting to have a conversation than me just keep talking. So what does the PMCSA do? Well, this is what it says on the tin. It's a crazy job description. I get to advise the Prime Minister on science in its very broadest sense. So that includes anywhere where there might be useful knowledge, information, data and evidence base that could inform policy and help government do it better. Now, obviously, I don't know all of science. And so my role becomes a connector piece rather than a guru. It's quite a disturbing title sometimes. So specifically, I advise the PM on whatever she needs. So I go find the people and the information that she might need to inform whatever policy is on her mind, and also other ministers. So sometimes she just delegates through to them. So we did a project on fisheries, commercial fisheries, and most of the time there I dealt with the Minister for Fisheries, who then became the Minister for Oceans and Fisheries. So it went from Stuart Nash to David Parker. So sometimes it's direct to her and sometimes it's other ministers, and quite often it's through officials as well, because people need to connect and see how our work's fitting in with their work. There's a role to promote understanding of and engagement with science, especially young people. And again, can't do all that myself, but great to encourage and connect with all the science communicators out there, which was particularly useful during COVID. And then I've got this conduit of alerts function. So if something exciting happens that might be useful for New Zealand, or there's a threat on the horizon, although I really shouldn't stand here and say that in tsunami land, if the bureaucracy is jammed up and if it's hard for people to get those ideas in or those alerts up, it's a short circuit function and I can just get straight to the beehive. And a lot of what I do, I end up building international relationships to do, because science is obviously an international pursuit, and I get to hang out with my counterparts around the world, at least on Zoom. So when I first got the role 4.5 years ago, I tried to set it up as a trusted, accessible bridge. The principles were already mentioned in the intro. I took those from a paper in Nature that was published the month before I started. And I think as a breed, scientists do very well on the rigorous, but we've got work to do on the inclusive, the transparent, and the accessible. So I've put a lot of attention in there. And the challenge is always that scientists like to dot every I, cross every T, give the best possible answer, which might not be ready until next March, and the policymakers and the politicians need an answer by Thursday. So bridging that time frame, explaining what we know, what we don't know, how certain we are about what we know, and when those error bars might narrow and we might be a bit surer, is the main challenge of the role. So I talk in the plural, it's not just me, there's a whole bunch of departmental science advisors in all those ministries, agencies and departments around Wellington. And they don't work for me, they work with me. I report straight to the PM, they report to their chief executives, usually in the ministries. But we're a community of practice, we swap notes, we make sure that advice we're giving is consistent, or at least that we're mindful if there's points where it might differ. And this is my little team. We're based in Auckland to keep us away from the politics with a small p in the day-to-day of Wellington. So we travel in and out of Wellington, but we're based out of the university. We're independent, not government employees. And they're such a great team of research analysts, writers, and advisors. They're the ones that put the words on the pages. So just some general thoughts about science advice that might interest you, I guess. Especially after COVID, when people sort of talked about following the science or not following the science. Science is never the only advice. Sometimes, like for COVID, where it was a brand new virus and nobody knew anything about it yet, it became a loud source of advice and an important source of advice. But it's never the only advice. And there's things that it's good at, and there's things that it's not good at. So defining the problem, looking at options that might not come through a kind of gut judgment call. But as I said, struggles with timely answers. And if you're trying to bridge that gap with a political timeframe, especially in an emergency, then you have to frame it really carefully. And I always throw this point in about facts now, because people have facts and alternate facts. Whatever the facts might be, they rarely change anyone's mind anyway. So I think scientists have got a lot of work to do to try and frame the facts in the context of how they came to that conclusion, to explain the evidence they looked at, to explain the assumptions and the uncertainties, and also be very careful not to use that evidence, those facts, as a proxy for values. So if anybody is interested in children's movies, there's a clip, which I won't show you now, on Inside Out, where the facts and opinions in somebody's brain get muddled up and shoved back into the different boxes. And I always show it to people who think that they're just talking facts, but actually their values are deeply embedded in the work that they do. So just being honest about the values, how experiments are framed, how evidence is framed, what we know and what we don't know, is, I think, an important part of building trust between science and government and the public. So the sorts of advice we end up doing in the office can be reactive or proactive. So more of my time has been spent on reactive stuff than I'd ever imagined. So there was the volcanic eruption at Whakaari, and then of course COVID-19 that's taken up a lot of time over the last 3 years. And then there's the more strategic parts, so where we're being proactive. So that's where I tend to ask as many people as I can get a hold of, where is there an evidence base that should be informing policy and isn't? I go up with a list to the PM and say, here's like 15 things we could work on next year. She goes, yeah, nah, maybe. I work up the years in a bit more detail, and then she picks one each year as a major project. And the first one that she picked was plastics. Huge consensus amongst everyone I talked to that that was an important topic. So that was our first major project back in 2019. But there's also informal advice. So she might text or call or just want to chat, to use me as a sounding board for advice that's come in, for example, on climate change. So there's a whole community of people already advising. There's a climate change commission, but sometimes understanding the political landscape and the evidence together and throwing some ideas around can help. So there's an informal role. Sometimes it's just a small piece of work that needs sorting. Or it might be a public-facing explainer, not with recommendations. So, for example, recently we did a piece on nitrates, and I think per word that took longer than any other project we've done, because the evidence is presented by two groups of people who are so polarized in the conclusions they've come to, because they've grabbed each end of the uncertain error bar and used it to back their own argument. So we had 20 referees, and it went back to them 2 or 3 times each until everyone was happy that the wording on that website, which is quite short and very light, actually didn't raise any more antibodies, and people were happy that that was a genuine consensus of what we knew and what we didn't know. And then there's the big pieces of work, like I'm going to talk about now. And occasionally just something comes up. So I might bob up and do something on genetic editing, not because anybody asked, but because it's important. So rethinking plastics, because someone actually read it. I've brought you some, I've left them on the table. So there's a big fat one for insomniacs. So that's the Lord of the Rings version. There's the Hobbit length one for people who don't like reading, and there's a really short one for people in a hurry. And it's also on the web, so we organised it so you could tunnel in and just see the bit that you liked. And I'll leave those, we've got some spare ones. You all know the problem. Astonishing, really, when you sit back and look what we've done since the 1950s. We invented this incredibly cool material, and the things that were cool about it was it didn't break down, and it was lightweight and could be used for everything. And then we made 8.3 billion tons of it and wondered why we were stuck with it and it wouldn't go away. It just shows we don't really think in systems, we tend to think about here. So we've got an astonishing global problem. The oceans are full of it. And there's a fantastic consciousness that we need to do better and solve this problem. Also a huge part of our emissions profile. But it's not always a bad thing. So the reason we've got so much of it is because it's such a great material. And for some applications, it's still the best material. And if you can use it in a way that it gets reused, then it's really not the end of the world. So what we tried to do with our expert panel when we did the Rethink Plastics project was work out what our relationship with this material should be. So it's not a finger-wagging report saying, don't do this, don't do this, don't do the other. It's a, yes, use this material, it's great. If I was in hospital and I was about to get an IV drip, I would really like plastic, thanks. There's nothing else that will do. But if I'm in a shop or if I'm buying a cup of coffee, maybe there's a better way to do that. And there are alternate materials that might work much better. The person on the photo in the middle there is Rachel Kirioni-Clark, who joined my office really early on. And she basically wrote the report. The team was still growing at that stage, and she did a fantastic job of pulling it all together. So she's one of the co-authors. And there's a quote there from the PM. The reason this project got a lot of traction was because the public wanted it done. The researchers knew that there was an evidence base that could be used. And the PM had social license to act in that she was in a coalition with the Green Party, and waste was part of what needed doing urgently. So unlike some of our later reports, there was a lovely sweet spot. The policies were being set, there was a political will to do something, and the evidence was sitting there. So we wrote the big monster report. There's a lot of detailed recommendations because we'd learnt so much. We thought we'd nudge towards implementation clues. We said we need a plan, but not just a plan, it has to be an action plan, so people need to do things. The government is well placed to lead the way in a lot of these things, leading by example and changing regulations, and also using things like procurement across its many institutions. We need to think about design, use and disposal, and I'll pick up on that in a minute. There's a lot of innovation that's going on in the space, but we need to really pick that up and amplify it and start to use some of those innovations, not just to create new materials, but to clean up the environment. And we need to understand the health impacts of all the plastic that's out there. So we're already seeing what it's doing to sea life. There's a nervousness, but not much data about what it might be doing to us with things like microplastics in the water. And for all our reports, we end up saying, well, we really need more data. It's very hard to see whether policies are working if you don't have data, and it's very hard to get funding to collect data. In the case of plastics, it was interesting. There was, I often get this, there's a lack of publicly available data, but once you start talking to people in the sector, you meet someone with their arms folded that says, I know where the data is. If you know where to look for it, there's loads of data. And it's how to get those arms unfolded and get people to put all their data into the middle. Not to lose any commercially valuable information, but to pool data in such a way that it's better for everyone and a resource for everyone to use. And I guess we had a tagline that was make best practice standard practice. It wasn't that there was anything we needed to know or didn't know. It's not like trying to solve climate change where there's major hurdles in terms of technology. Everything we need is really there. We just need to pick up best practice, make it standard practice, and shift the system to make it easy to do the right thing. So we had a vision, we had those different high-level recommendations, we had a few tools and investments that needed to go on in the middle, and then we had a vision of what success might look like. And we had a bit of fun at the beginning of the report, painting a picture of what New Zealand could look like in 2030. So it was slightly poetic license and slightly science fiction. I obviously read too much Margaret Atwood, but we tried to paint a picture of what it could look like so that rather than everybody being told what they were doing wrong, they could see how it could work in a different way. So if you don't mind a bit of tongue-in-cheek, have a look at that. It's on the web. So these are just a few graphics from the report that I thought might be useful for this audience. So you've got a circular economy talk coming up, I see. So I won't spend too much time on that, but just to make the high-level point that since the 50s, in terms of plastic, we've been very much take, make, use, waste. We just use it once and throw it away. We need to move away from that so that we don't waste. And there's various different ways we can do that so that things don't go to landfill. They instead stay in use. So ideally, we wouldn't throw them away at all. But if we must throw them away, we need to collect them and either reuse them, repair them, remake them, or recycle them. I think people get quite daunted by a circular economy because it's so hard to imagine how it might look being completely circular. So I always include a little waste arrow at the bottom. There's always going to be some waste. And so maybe it's a spiral economy and we slowly narrow the spiral until we're not wasting anything and we get a true circle. Another way to think about it is to move the 3 R's to 6 R's. So for a long time, we've had kind of mantra of reduce, reuse, recycle. You can do better than that. So there's 6 R's and different people call the 6 R's different things, but we went for this one. The top one is rethink. So is there another way of doing this? Just refuse to use it. Quite like that one. Replace it with something else. If you really must use a material, in this case plastic, reduce it. So use less of it, use less often, find ways of making your container more lightweight, all those things. Make it durable so you can reuse it. If all else fails, recycle it, and then dispose. So knowing nothing about plant pots, I thought I would try and include some graphics and frame the discussion on the 6 R's around plant pots, but I'm sure you all know way more about all this than me, so I'm in risky territory here. But the graphics seemed like too good to resist. So yes, we could rethink when plastic's used in any industry, and one of the things that we made a recommendation for was to throw it to different sectors and say, you guys figure this. So a bunch of people sitting in a university meeting room connecting with stakeholders is never going to solve the actual on-the-ground problems, but we were hoping we could put some principles out that might help people. So for Rethink, I mean, that often means going back to pre-1950s. So you don't have to use plastic because you didn't use plastic to grow plants in before. And there's all sorts of other materials that could be thought about. So there's some tin cans at the top. I'm sure there's lots of problems with those. Terracotta pots, which I'm sure are hard to transport and quite expensive. But there are other options out there that people might want to think about. Once you get into using novel materials, one thing to think about is to just use one type of material or easily separated parts. So a massive problem for the recycling industry is multi-layered materials. Think of Tetra Paks and things. So where you've got, or those New Zealand Post, the old school bubble packs where it's different types of plastic and layers. if you think about it from the perspective of the recycling plant, that's really hard. You can't pull all the bits into different waste streams. So if you're designing new things that are going to be recycled, make them easily separable. Don't use plastics that can't be recycled is a really hard thing to follow. And one of the recommendations we made was that we needed some national consistency, because what happens to things you put in your recycling bin at present in different parts of the country, they have completely different fates. So you can't do a national campaign about reducing plastic and then have 27 sub-clauses about where your recycling bin might go in your local region. So MFE is working on that, the Ministry for the Environment, but in the meantime, everyone needs to do a bit of homework and focus on the ones that we know are easy. So plastics 1, 2, and 5, most places now are successfully recycled if they're in an uncontaminated recycling bin. And some of those materials won't be useful for you guys at all. So PET is the one that's fantastic in terms of multi-use. It can keep being recycled and used again, but I don't think it would make a very good plant pot. So there's a lot of local knowledge needed and a lot of thinking as to when these things are in the consumer's hand, what are they going to do with them? Which bin are they going to put them in? Are they going to recycle it, or is it actually going to be wish cycled, which is the practice whereby someone hopes it will be recycled, throws it into the recycling bin wherever they are in the country, and it just contaminates the whole bin, and none of the stuff that could have been recycled gets recycled either. It's quite depressing. Reduce is obvious, just find other ways of doing it. And lightweighting packaging or concentrating products is for some industries really helpful. So if you're making washing powder, or let's think what could get smaller, anything that could get smaller and more concentrated, so flavors, things like that, you can shrink the size of your product and let the customer dilute it. Or you can use different materials that are still able to be recycled, which are more lightweight, so that you use less of the material. In all these things, the whole life cycle of a product is important. So wine bottles is a good example. A lot of people say glass bottles are better than plastic bottles for wine because you can recycle the glass. If you could recycle the plastic, there's an argument that that would be better because it's lighter, especially if your wine's being shipped a long way. And the energy you need to recycle glass is quite high. So for every single product, there's a massive number of considerations, and transport of that product and its weight is often an important part of that. There's some wine manufacturers now that ship in great big plastic bags, essentially, and put it in bottles at the other end, which makes a lot of sense in terms of carbon footprint, although it doesn't probably taste so good if it hasn't been sitting in the bottles. So many, many different factors. For reuse, design systems for reuse at the outset, so refillable packaging. So quite a few people grizzle about compost bags. We've had some great conversations with people saying, why are they in plastic? Why aren't they in biodegradable bags? To which the answer is they'll biodegrade, because compost's quite good at biodegrading things. But are there systems for compost that don't require a bag? Can people bring their own? I don't know. There's systems all over the world starting to spring up where the packaging is kind of part of the delivery service. Not many of them are economic yet. And in terms of the life cycle analysis, a lot depends on whether your delivery guy is driving an electric car, a petrol car, or on a bike. But lots of products you can have delivered and give your empties. So places like New York, high population density, small distances, that's starting to work. I don't know if it would work for you guys or not. And of course, then we're drifting into the lower parts of the hierarchy. If we are using plastic, use the recycled stuff. And I think your black pots are recycled. But you can tell me that in the discussion. Can we replace with something that's biodegradable and easily used? And huge innovation in that area. But the question is going to be, does it scale? Is it any good? Is it up to spec? Does it actually compost? And again, if you can recycle it, do recycle it, and think about that when it's being designed. So lots of work's been done on recycling. I think often people have that as the go-to, whereas the better solutions are further up the waste hierarchy. But if you are going to recycle, need to think about the design, the multi-layers, the disposal, is it actually easy for people to dispose? If some muppet puts everything in the wrong bin, does that sacrifice the whole lot? Who's going to collect it? Are they going to keep the streams separate, or are they going to pool them? There's some heartbreaking stories where beautifully sorted waste all gets chucked into the same van, especially in emergencies. COVID was terrible for recycling. Is there good sorting where it's going? Do you understand the sorting where it's going? Can you use that to guide customer behaviour? For example, some sorting plants can't do lids, any lids, even an ice cream tub lid. If it goes through with the paper side up, the machine just thinks it's paper, and that contaminates the paper. Is that the machine that's being used locally? So many questions to do it right. And then there's the actual chemistry of the processing and how you incorporate that back into the products. So we came up with a list of 50-odd recommendations with lots of fine detail to do two things. One was try and shift the whole system in an organised way, and the other was to make it easy for people to do the right thing and for researchers to provide solutions in the new system. And we launched that report just before Whakaari White Island erupted and before the pandemic. So I have this locked in my head as the end of the before times, because my work changed completely after this. So we had a fantastic launch down at Sustainable Coastlines in Auckland. The PM came, the Minister in charge of waste came, Eugenie Sage. And one of the painful things about giving science advice is the traditional linear flow is you write the big fat report, it goes to the ministry and falls into a hole where the officials write advice on your advice. So to try and speed that up a bit, we'd worked alongside the officials, not because we weren't independent, but to let them know what we were doing so that their advice could land at a similar time to our report. And again, because of this social license and political will to do something, that happened in this case. So the speech from the throne in 2020, we actually got a shout out, which made us all very happy. So Dame Patsy said that implementing the recommendations was one of the things that was going to happen. So that was a good sign. So in terms of the timeline, people are often interested in this. This was the day of the launch. So we got on the telly, and there were some immediate announceables. Government will act on these things. It was a few small things, but it was some things. And then it goes quiet, and it's always really depressing to me that the thing that gets the news is the announceable and not when it actually happens. But the exciting thing is we've slowly been going through a series of announcements on this one. So this was mid-2020, and again, this is now the boring fine print, but the proposals came out to phase out PVC in particular. Nobody likes PVC. Polystyrene packaging, especially those expanded polystyrene meat trays. So these are things where there is a clear, easy, affordable replacement. So the easy stuff was getting done first. The straws, the stirrers, blah, blah, blah. So that all got announced. And I won't go through every painful announcement, but there's been a series, including this month, where we finally got rid of the cotton buds, the meat trays, and the stirrers. So all those things are slowly coming through. It's not perfect, and we still get asked a lot of questions. So do we know where all the plastic comes from and goes to in New Zealand? No, we don't have a clue. So there's a diagram that you can look at in the report or pull up on the web, and we've highlighted what we do know and what we don't know. It's majority what we don't know. So most of the plastic that comes in is imported. It's packaging on goods that we can't control. It's almost enough to make the panel at the time throw their hands up in despair and give up. But there are some ways into that. One is trade agreements. So things like the CPTPP, the CP part, which makes it more progressive. It's hard to find things to do, and plastic packaging is one of them. So you could imagine trade blocks where you are restricting the type of plastic in packaging, say. So there's some headway you can make, but there's also just an awful lot of plastic stuff, never mind the packaging, that gets imported, and we have no way of knowing how much or if it's going up or down. Is plant-based better? Maybe. So there's a lot of greenwashing around plant-based plastics. So you can have fossil fuel-based plastics that are biodegradable or not, and you can have plant-based plastics that are biodegradable or not. And you can have plant-based plastics that are using something that would otherwise be wasted and are adding to your sustainability story, or you can have ones that are grown from something on land that could have been used to grow food. So there's no simple answer, and the people that write "this is made from plants" on the packaging should be challenged, because you'd like to know which plant, what would have been grown there if the plant hadn't been grown. Was it waste, or was it grown just for this bottle? And what have you made it into, and does it biodegrade? Are compostable plastics better? Probably, but there's a few ifs and buts there too. You don't want them to compost too fast, or your thing will fall out of the bag before it arrives. New Zealand Post did a fantastic survey of all the materials available just as we were doing this report, and they could only find ones that biodegraded before they made it to your letterbox if it rained, or ones that were so slow they couldn't find that sweet spot. That'll come on board, but it's not quite there yet. The thing that really raised the blood pressure of the lovely people on our expert panel were allegedly compostable coffee cup lids. So PLA lids, they do compost eventually in an industrial composter. But what people do is go, oh, great, it's fine, I'll chuck it in the recycling. It's hard to distinguish from what's in the recycling, and it contaminates the whole bin. So it makes it worse. So if you've got a compostable coffee cup lid, either put it in a special place or put it in the landfill bin, which is counterintuitive and a great big greenwash. That said, PLA is a fantastic part of other products, and it's fantastic as part of a supply chain where you know the fate of it and it can be composted or recycled. Should we ban plastic packaging? Well, no, probably not. We could try, but if you think through everything in your life that comes in plastic, you're going to have a huge job to find a practical way to move from where we are to there. You can have it as an aspirational target, but anything you buy is going to come in plastic. And unless we want to go back to some completely isolated existence where we control the supply line, that's really not practical. And the last one is incineration better than landfill. This one's coming back again in our food waste project. Again, it depends. So if you're living in the middle of a large city in Europe, and there's a massive amount of waste and no land, and you have an incinerator that captures all the emissions and uses the heat for energy, probably. But if you're in a long, skinny country that has some well-equipped landfills, if the transport costs of taking the rubbish to the incinerator mean that you've used up a whole pile of emissions, and if the creation of a facility that burns waste creates a demand for waste and a supply chain that means that people are going to waste more, maybe not. So none of these simple questions have simple answers. In terms of innovation, when I was writing this talk, I thought, well, somebody must be doing this for plant pots, and sure enough, I just met him. So there are some great innovative solutions. I am not going to talk about the details because I think someone from science here, and I know Peter's here because I met him before. So correct me if I'm wrong. These are a mixture of wood and PLA. So PLA is the thing I just mentioned. It will compost eventually. And if you put it in the right place, it will. And there's some nutrients in the wood. I'll wave your pot there. This is not science advice. This is product placement. He's taking a picture. Yep, so there's all sorts of things that you can think of in your context that might really work for you. This is one of many. And before I open it up for discussion, the while I'm here slide, I must have an incredibly informed audience for the thing that I'm now worried about. So we're doing another great big report because we spent so long getting the cover on the plastic one because it was such a big problem. We're doing this one in a series of short reports. So far, we've come out with a framework. We've looked at food waste as a global and local problem. It's massive. Something like a third of food gets wasted. The carbon emissions associated with that are phenomenal, and there's lots of hungry people that need feeding. So in hopefully a week, we will put out the first report with recommendations on food rescue, which is great because it takes otherwise to be wasted food, gives it to hungry people, saves all those emissions if you do it right. The next thing we're moving on to is driven by the timetable of the Ministry for the Environment, who have out for consultation this piece of work about collecting food waste from every household. I have a reservation that that's great if something good happens to it, but there are so many options for what might happen to it. So at the moment, we are scoping a piece of work looking at compost, either community compost or large-scale compost, anaerobic and aerobic digestion, and all the other things that might happen to food waste, and not coming up with recommendations because they're going to be so commercial and context specific, but saying, okay, what does this do for emissions? What does this do for water use? What would this mean in different contexts? Just useful guide for anyone trying to make those decisions. One of the questions that we've only just started but keeps being asked is it easy to stick to the composting standard? If you do make compost, even if it does meet the composting standard, are there contaminants in there that we should be worried about that people don't? Should we worry about whether it goes into the food chain? And are these products any bloody good? So it's all very well having this lovely circular argument, but if you guys have been given compost that doesn't work nearly as well as the sawdust and fertilizer that you can get, are you actually going to use it? So any reckons that you've got on compost, either now or over morning tea, would be fantastic. And there's the website if you want to go digging for some plastic stories, and really happy to take any questions, either in real life or through the thingy. Thanks. Any questions? Someone going to share the questions? Oh, do I have to read them, or is someone going to pick? So shall I just work through them? Is that the plan? Okay, you can be the plan.
Yeah, we'll make a plan together, I think, won't we? Obviously, if people have you voted for your favourite questions, everyone? Because now's the time to give it a big thumbs up, and whichever one is the best one, we'll start with that. Okay. And then we'll go down until we get to the one that no one liked.
Right, I'll start at the top then, shall I?
Yeah, start at the top.
So what measure? Oh, no, it's moved.
No one voted for that one.
Are we looking at upgrading our recycling facilities across New Zealand? It would be great to see curbside recycling for the retailers, plant packaging and pots. So yes is the short answer. So as part of the recommendations, we prioritised which plastics we thought could be done nationally, so 1, 2 and 5. Various investments have gone in, especially around PET recycling, which won't help you guys. But some places have started doing other plastics, so 2 and 5. One of the complexities is that we make advice to central government, and nearly all these decisions are made at local government. So how that all ties together is deeply impactful on what you see in terms of your business or your household. So I think it's happening in a fairly clunky, slow way, but it is getting better. And there is bits and pieces of investment from the Waste Minimisation Fund, which is funded by the landfill levy, which is ramping up. So the funds for all that to happen is slowly ramping up. So I think the kind of central signals and trends are good, and we're hopeful that local government implements them. That's that one.
The next one out?
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay,
Then I won't get a crick in my neck. Yeah.
Are we looking at upgrading our recycling facilities across New Zealand? It would be great to see curbside recycling for the retailers, plant packaging and pots.
I did that one.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Next one. You've done that one. So
Yeah. Keeps moving.
Yeah. I don't know how to work this thing. How could we get our local councils to recycle PP5 plastics?
Yeah, so some do. A lot don't. There's a new Chief Science Advisor for the regional and unitary councils, Chris Stoney, and whoever is asking that question, reach out to me later and I will connect you. So to try and bridge this central government, local government gap, we've got this role. Now, poor guy has only got 2 days a week for the whole country, local government, but it's a start, and it's recognition that science advice does need to go in there. So he's the person now who would be able to move that conversation along. And there are funds available through the Waste Minimisation Fund, but how that's coordinated across the country needs work, and he's your guy.
Great. What measures can the government take if our industry doesn't respond to the new waste regulations? Tax us? Limit plastic imports? What are we going to do? You talk to Jacinda all the time.
Maybe it's in here.
Just read that.
Yeah. So there's a whole pile of levers that you can pull, but a lot of what you need to do is build social license and get people on board. And the joy of this project compared to, say, the one we did on commercial fisheries is that we didn't really meet anyone that didn't agree we needed to solve the problem. So I think it's one where everyone's on the same bus.
What does the government... No.
You see my problem now? Yeah.
How is it possible or helpful for a CRI to tie up critical technology like bioplastics in closed IP arrangements? I hope you understand that question because I've got no idea what it was.
I get lots of similar questions to that. So is there someone from Scion here? Yeah. Do you want to answer that one? Yeah.
That's a massive field. Oh, sorry. So in this particular context, as we just heard, plastics are very special. So what is part of this, what's referred to as our IP agreement here, is a very special formulation that does a very special thing in an application. It is not the world of bioplastics that's tied up. So there's a lot of other stuff left, right, and center that are still possible in this area. So it's this special material that goes into this unique pot, which Peter's been driving for a couple of years and had the vision to put out there and develop with us, which is great. It's actually great news for all of us that we've got people like Peter in New Zealand who say, okay, I'll take a punt on this. I'll take a lot of risk in it and drive it forward, and hopefully, it's something that you can all use in the future. But no, we haven't tied up bioplastics. That would be great, though.
Well, it would and it wouldn't. So I'll just add some independent comments on that. So thanks for picking it up because I wasn't aware of the details. So I think it's PLA in here, isn't it? I mean, PLA is used in all sorts of different materials with all sorts of different formulations. So you can go use PLA in any product. Nobody's going to be able to capture the patent rights on that. And the counter to that challenge is if nobody picks it up and commercializes it, how are you going to get the pot? So we need the right kind of commercial models to get these things developed, the research paid for and on the market, but this won't be the only one. And the special thing about this, the wood part, right? Is that right? Well, I'm sure there's a secret magic ingredient, but wood's a big chunk of it, right? Yeah.
Like KFC.
Let's move on quickly. Yeah.
Right, moving on quickly. Okay, here we go. I love that all of these questions are from the same person, anonymous. Who is anonymous? What does the government intend to do to make the recovery of plastic materials for recycling easy for home consumers?
Yeah, that was one that we had a real bee in our bonnet about on the panel. So for one, it has to be the same everywhere. And for two, it has to be really simple. So, I mean, I've seen people with PhDs just standing over the recycling bin, squinting and trying to work out where different bits goes. It's too complicated. There's all sorts of nice labelling schemes overseas that we could borrow. And I think if we just made it homogenous across the country so that you didn't take your Tetra Pak from Auckland to Hamilton and need to swap bins, that would be a huge step forward. So that is happening, but slowly. And again, snell that with what can central government do, what can local government do. So MFE needs to have the conversation with Wayne Brown to make sure it happens. Easy.
Okay. Is our science system structured in a way that enables it to provide solutions to industry to solve complex problems like this?
Some parts of it are, some parts of it aren't. So there's a massive proposal about to come out called Future Pathways, which I don't know if many of you have come across. But at the moment, we have a science system that was designed in the 90s and is really good at some things and really not so good at other things. And so the minister's having a big look at it. So there was a huge consultation process. Lots of experts sat down and wrote essays over their Christmas break last year. It's all being distilled into a white paper and watch this space. So I think we could do a lot better. This is the short answer.
It's a good short answer. And I feel like even I can answer the next question, which is should we implement national standards for recycling rather than all the variations between the different regions? Yes, we should. Was that the right answer?
Yeah.
Great. Yes. Also, do you know Dr. Joel Rindelab? He works at Auckland University.
Yeah, I starred in a rap video with him.
I was in a rap video with him too on Treasure Island. Anyway,
there you go.
Sorry, we digress. Sorry, guys. What efforts are he loves microplastics. No, he doesn't love them. He hates them. But yeah. What efforts are underway to encourage innovation and a centre of excellence in plant-based protein alternatives?
Yeah, that might come out of this Future Pathways thing that I've just talked about. So one of the things that the government wants to do as part of that is set priorities so that we can create critical mass in key areas. And that could be one of them, but we're a long way from deciding that yet.
I think we've still got time for a couple more, AQC. Is that right? She's not listening to me. She's talking to someone else. I was going to say there is one lovely person who's got their phone still on loud. I've heard they've got a lot of messages coming through, so just make sure your phones are on silent if you can. That'd be great. Are insects being considered to speed the breakdown from food waste?
Yeah, I love
question.
the insects. So I'm supposed to be completely unbiased, but I'm secretly hoping the insects win. So this is happening, the black soldier flies who are eating food waste in Australia. And one of my team's going over next week to have a look at them to see how it works and how it scales. So basically the flies eat the food waste and then the animals eat the flies. There's a few questions around it, but it would just be such a fantastic solution if it works. So hopefully, and if anyone's got any expertise or insights, love to hear them.
Great. Okay. We'll keep going, shall we? They're very good questions and very great answers, obviously. As well as food, compost. Is composting of nursery-specific products being looked at?
It could be if somebody tells me how important it is and how it will help. So I'm really interested in whether it's practical or useful to have two streams of compost, one to go back into the food chain and one to go back into plants. I have no idea yet whether that's practical or not, but if it is, let me know. I'd love to talk to you.
Do you think that New Zealand's isolation is a barrier to participating in the circular economy?
It should be an advantage if we play it right. But at the moment, we're very reliant on exports and imports, which does create a bit of a leak. But if you thought about us more as an island and tried to keep things within the island, then it should be an advantage. And the best example of the food waste being circular that I've seen was actually on Waiheke. Now, they've got huge advantages in that they've got lots of rich people with time and expertise to help and not too many people that need feeding. But they've got a lovely system set up so that they've got rescued food that goes to people that need it. They've got community kitchens to eat the rescued food so it doesn't go to waste. The scraps go to compost. The compost goes to the market garden. The vegetables go to the vineyards. The waste goes back and round you go. So there are advantages to being on an island because there's a problem with shipping waste offshore. And that is one lever that the government is pulling. It's going to get harder to ship our waste offshore, so it'll have to get more circular.
What do you think? What does a plastic-free plant producer sector, what does it look like? Cool.
Yeah, so we didn't do that in our vision, but it would be great, wouldn't it? So everyone would have, I guess, containers that they were growing in that they came back and got plants for in some kind of recycling system. So you would just keep reusing the same containers. People would turn up, customers would turn up with vessels that were fit for purpose to collect their compost and whatever else. It would be fun to try and work out what it looked like.
We'll just have a couple more and then you've answered so many questions. Thank you so much.
Right.
What thoughts have been given to micro and nano particulate plastics?
A lot. So this is one thing that the scientific community is getting more nervous about. So plastic keeps breaking down. It doesn't go away. It goes into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, and that ends up everywhere. So if you're an optimist, you could say it's an artificial form of fibre, and if we eat it, it doesn't matter, and if we drink it, it doesn't matter. If you're a pessimist, I actually gave an interview with Brian Crump, and as I was going up in the lift to do the interview, I heard him say, coming up, the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor on whether nanoplastics are an existential threat to humanity. And it's like, that's not what I'm going to talk about. But there is that kind of hype building. So there's no alarm at the moment, but also there's no obvious solutions. And I'm really interested in the compost sense. And if we keep composting, are we contaminating the compost more and more, and are we getting more and more microplastics? So there's small projects looking at that, but no definitive answers yet. So nothing to panic about, but one to watch.
Okay, and RawsTech master batch that can be incorporated into conventional PP and PE plastics, converting to naturally decomposing plastics. Would this be a consideration?
Yes.
Great. Solid yes for that one. Yeah.
I'm looking at Scion to see if they're going to help me, but they're not. So there's all these different techs to achieve the same thing. I haven't looked at that one specifically, but for any product, there's going to be a range of possibilities and a whole pile of material science that needs to be done to match the qualities of your product to the end use.
Okay, Kirsty, should we go for the one more? As long as you're happy to keep answering.
I'm happy.
'cause
I prefer it when people like talk at me, but let's
Yeah.
do it this way. Yeah.
we've got to do, it's the time of technology, you know?
Yeah.
We can't talk to each other, we just Facebook each other. Okay, great. Yes. Ask the questions yourselves. That's the
there's
story.
more mics left.
I'll run around with these. I'll take that one. Well, here I come with the microphone.
Thank you, Juliet. Yes. I'd like to talk about the CRI system. I was anonymous that asked the question about the CRI system.
Yep.
And these are really complex issues. Plastics,
are.
we've looked at, we've got a plastics advisory committee looking at this. All they see is a wall of complexity and options. And what I'm wondering about is the CRI system that we currently have, I believe, favours large business, export-focused business. It is hard science. It's not accessible
Yep.
to industries like ours that have complex problems to solve. What's the solution to that?
So 5 years ago, I think the answer would have been Callaghan Innovation. That focused on small, medium enterprises and how they might grab a hold of tech. So acknowledging the issue that you've raised, that it's easier. I mean, I've been on the board of a CRA, and it's very hard within the current funding model not to prioritise the big customers and bring in the big contracts. And when you're applying for a grant as a CRI researcher, again, the system's kind of tipped so that those things happen for good reasons. So the part of the ecosystem that was there for the little guys is Callaghan. And so the idea was that small businesses could go to this central place and access tech. Now, I'm not here to do a critique of Callaghan, but the people that are working with Callaghan are very happy. But I don't think it's resourced to do everything and all customers. And so it's a very good time for me and people like Gary Evans, who's the Chief Scientist for Ministry for Business Innovation and Employment, to say, all right, what would work? What do we need? So the lead agency on plastics is Ministry for the Environment. They are not brilliantly connected to the tech. And so what is it that we need to bridge that gap? So we said we need science-informed, sector-based plans to try and bring these things together. And you guys are doing it, which is fantastic. So if you can tell us what it is that's missing, what's needed, I'm really happy to feed that in. It's a good moment to be piping up.
We'll give you a list.
Yeah, do. Yeah. Do you want to do it now?
Well, look, for a start, I mean, we have fantastic innovation in the bioplastic material industry. Very, very excited about it. And then we see due to the CRI system that it gets locked up in an IP arrangement. And we are thinking, okay, now how do we collectively as an industry progress innovations like that when CRIs have access to that tech and can lock it up in IP? And what is next in that scenario? And are we going to lock ourselves into a corner?
So it sounds like this is a case study that we might be able to look at to unpack. So why don't we take that offline, and I'll introduce you to Gary Evans, and we can have a look at how that's working.
Look, it's not about the material or the arrangement, it's about the structure of the CRI system that enables that.
But that's why it would be a great case study. So yeah.
My one is the top one. So one of the major problems we have with, there's only a few companies that do kind of bulk composting for production and things like that. So Living Earth comes from household garden bins. The process itself is fabulous.
Yeah.
The garden bins go to the system, they come back into the company and it goes through. But the people putting stuff in the bins isn't working. So I just want to know how we can encourage people to actually follow the systems that we already have, as opposed to just trying to bring up new ones constantly, because the ones we currently have, although good, are still not working.
Yeah, and I think that's the absolute crux of the nervousness I've got around food waste. Because, for example, if we said no meat, how do we stop people just chucking meat in there, and how do you know it's in there? So the team went to see Living Earth and heard the same things. One of the people on the plastics panel was Nikki Harday, who's written a book called The Psychology of Sustainability, addressing exactly this. And she was someone who was really big on getting everyone on board rather than giving them a set of thou shalt nots. Some countries do it really well, some Scandinavian countries, places like Japan. So there are ways that we can learn from them. But I think the basic messages are to make it consistent across the country so people aren't confused, and just to put out really good campaigns explaining to people what we're doing and why we're doing it. So, I mean, I think if you showed people a video of what happened to things when they go wrong, like the neatly recycled plastics that end up in landfill because too much PLA, or the green garden waste that just can't be used because it's contaminated with all these other things, that will go a long way. And that is perhaps somewhere where central government can help in terms of setting guidance and helping with the national campaign. Have you got any ideas?
It's hard. It's a few running it for the whole.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's do you get trouble if you put something in the bin, but you can't have like cameras on everybody's bins and all that kind of stuff. So it becomes a really complex thing where just a few people are ruining it for the majority.
So Nikki would say definitely not like policing it, but encouraging good behaviour. In Christchurch, where I lived for a long time, the green bins go out, and if you do it well, you get a gold bin. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, who would actually care about getting a gold bin? But in some suburbs, it really caught on. So it became competitive to get a gold bin. And that fits with what Nikki was saying about making a positive thing, making it normal to do the right thing, and just get people to understand why we're doing it and what we're saving. Yeah. I never made it to gold bin, just full disclaimer.
Hi, it's been a very interesting talk you've given this morning. One thing that I've just sort of noticed is that there's a lot of focus on reusing and recycling plastics, and there's not a lot of focus on actually getting rid of them. I'm very passionate about the oceans, and I'm very, very hot on microplastics, and about also there's research coming out of Europe as to what it's actually going into our lungs. It's been transferred from mother to fetus in rats. And I think that New Zealand needs to be really focusing heavily on actually encouraging people to develop alternatives to plastic, natural alternatives, instead of just constantly recycling. And that's one solution to the problem, but there needs to be more focus on natural alternatives. So I'm currently involved in a business where we've been developing a completely biodegradable, compostable planter bag that we have also found a completely 100% natural preservative for. And we're currently applying to NPI for funding for more R&D on that. And I see our friends at Scion, and I can't remember the other chap's name, are also trying to solve this problem that we have in our industry. And, you know, the plastic pot thing, and the planter bag in the tree industry is completely unrecyclable. It's a huge issue worldwide. So I think whilst, you know, your committee has been focusing on the recycling, I think the government needs to really focus on more funding for alternatives. That's just my comment. Thank you.
Yeah, agree with you totally. And if you go through the recommendations, they all say the best thing to do is to stop using it. I guess that the priority that the Ministry for the Environment has in terms of the order that they implement is what's doable and when. So there's some immediate pressures that can be solved with recycling infrastructure, and the rethinking maybe takes longer, but I'm not disagreeing at all. It's solutions like yours that we need in the end. And a lot of the things that we did in the 1940s are perfectly serviceable, more serviceable now, so long as we don't end up with perverse consequences. So for example, if you have someone in a diesel truck collecting everybody's containers and pumping out a whole pile of carbon and then redelivering them, that might be worse than the alternative. In terms of microplastics, yes, those studies are out. They're just a few studies at the moment, and they're in extreme cases. The depressing thing about microplastics is we could solve it here, but we wouldn't solve it. So if we're going to have an influence on microplastics and nanoplastics, because the air and the waters are connected worldwide, there's microplastics in Antarctica and places where there's never been plastic. So we need to do that in a way that we are leading and trying to lead by example. We won't be able to solve it just for our islands. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, no, I've got one good question. Just one more.
Just one more.
Just one more, please. So there's lots of talk about recycling or alternative materials, and there's a bit of chat around the need to do life cycle assessments of those so that you can see, you know, like you're saying with the plastic recycling, if you drive a diesel truck and you make emissions, is there, similar to the waste hierarchy, is there like a problems hierarchy? Like what's a bigger deal? Is it the emissions, or is it the mountain of plastic waste? Is it the microplastics? Is there some sort of pecking order for problems?
I wish there was, because that would make my job a lot easier. So what we try and do is make that explicit. So for example, for the different ways of getting rid of food waste, if you're really worried about water, then maybe go this way. And if you're more worried about carbon emissions, maybe go the other way. So many things are trying to solve global issues, but the solutions just have to understand the local context. And so sadly, for each individual use case, it's really complicated. But what we try and do is pull out some guiding principles that help everybody and then put enough detail in there to help the ministry implement.
Well, I think you'll all agree that that was a fantastic talk by Dame Juliet. Thank you very much. But another round of applause for you, I think.